Welcome everyone to another episode of the Catributors podcast. This week with our guest, whose name I probably mispronounce. What was it? Ghorm? Somewhere along those lines. So welcome. Please introduce yourselves.
Thank you very much for having me here and being good Österreicher, having a beer with your with the stream.
That's a frequent feature on this podcast is Atam's beer glass.
Yes, and I'll even have a Santa hat this week.
So thank you very much for having me here. I was very flattered that you asked me to join you. So look forward to our discussion today.
It's our pleasure. So yeah, the first topic is basically what recently happened is the new patch in Christmas and New Year's celebration and all the stuff that came with it. So I guess everybody already saw the Santa gifts. I mean, we've talked about those when we had the devblog news about them. You can now see the drop rates, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely been one of the more positive changes, and probably the most positive change in the game over the last year.
I agree. I have been personally quite satisfied with the response level from Wargaming since probably October. So obviously things sort of became very dramatic in mid-August, and there was a lot of unfortunately negative press that came out of the CC situation, starting with Little White Mouse, and there were a bunch of triggering events from that. And having worked in tech for 3 decades, I kind of read that I don't know if there were some sort of organization changes at the top or whatever it was, but they're clearly, at least in my opinion, they've kind of turned a new leaf to be quite communicative and quite open about what they're doing with a lot of different topics. And the drop rates is one, I think, simple example. I think our discussion about submarines may color that, so those positive feelings a little bit. But generally I thought it's been quite good. I think this holiday season situation or particular update has been quite well received. At least that's my impression. Not just because of the drop rates, but because I think Wargaming's been the opportunities have been pretty good. You can spend the New Year's certificates and containers and stuff like that. So I think but this season has been received better than the previous season.
Yeah, I think more or less agree with that. It's been, to put that into contrast, World of Tanks had their own miscommunication over their Christmas event, which led to them having to give a bunch of shards, and I can't remember what the other thing is, but it's like the thing they're doing for the Christmas decorations in the home screen. And basically, they'd put the wrong word up in the article for people buying the crates were thinking they weren't going to get any duplicates, and then hastily had to change it. And that got a lot of people riled up before they sort of went, yeah, okay, we'll refund the people that have been affected on NA. So they did, but do the right thing. But it took them like 2 or 3 days to go, okay, yes, we'll do the right thing. So it's kind of refreshing almost to not have any kind of stink around World of Warships around this time of year.
Oh yeah. Which I guess also brings us to the next thing, the Dockyard. I mean, it's grindy, but I feel like it's okay-ish. Or what I've seen so far from the missions, I think it's okay. And the Repulse is a pretty good price for the Repulse is something that you get for free, right?
I mean, just even grinding as far as the Repulse, I think, would be a good use of time for most people. I bought the minimum number needed of the Dockyard missions, and then I've done most of it so far. Like the vast majority has just been through the co-op battles I've been doing to knock off my steel snowflakes. So I know it's the first couple of stages. It's not going to be that difficult, but yeah, it's not taken overly long, even in co-op so far.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think Wargaming learned a lot out of the whole Puerto Rico situation. I think that, offering a tier 10 as part of a grind would need to be more substantial than it would be for a tier 8 or for a tier 9. But I think my read is that Wargaming understood that they needed to make it more accessible for these Dockyard events. So I agree with Atom and that this particular event is not onerous, but it's not a slam dunk either, and it shouldn't be. And I agree with the observation that even if you don't want to put the doubloons in for the final development stages to get the Marlborough, you can at least get the Repulse, which is a very respectable tier 6 battleship. The Dreadnought is nice for the historical value, but it's a little bit of a port queen since we don't play tier 3s very often. But yeah, I think otherwise, I think for the majority of players, it's going to be getting the Repulses is quite straightforward with some regular play.
I was a little disappointed that if you already have Dreadnought, you get credit compensation instead of doubloons, because it wouldn't have been a huge number of doubloons for a tier 3, but oh well.
Yeah, that's a pattern that I think we've seen probably in the last year or so, is that with these events where you get things, you can earn ships for free. They've been issuing credits instead of doubloons. I don't know if there's like psychologically some threshold, whether that's starting at tier 8 that they start issuing doubloons again, but yeah, I understand where you're coming from. So. But otherwise, I think the update has been quite, like I said, been quite well received, and the Dockyard event is decent. So
Yeah. I mean, I personally don't even have an interest in the Marlborough, but I like that they finally put like a good like the Repulse feels like a nice price. Obviously, I haven't played it yet, but from what I've seen, and there is historical value in that, like that's a very nice ship that you can get for free. And then if you go through the entire grind and pay some doubloons, then you can get a tier 9 premium. So, and there was no misleading like with the Puerto Rico where they're like, hey, you can get it for free. Oh no, wait, not really. Yeah, so right. I'm satisfied with it.
Yeah. I mean, they're technically, none of them are really truly free because you at least have to invest your time, right? So you have to make a personal choice whether you're willing to invest the time. But for the players, but it isn't overly excessive in the time commitments or the time requirements. Agreed. Now, I think the other, in my opinion, the highlight in a lot of ways of the update beyond the sort of the New Year's events is the access to the new German battlecruisers. So I don't know if we want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, it's basically the next that comes. I mean, the patch, and I agree. I mean, I love crawling battleships, so I love the new German line, and I've been waiting for them now for like a Like I got to the tier 7 in the early access stuff with the bundles, and now I could unlock the tier 8, 9, and 10. And I mean, the tier 10 is pretty strong. It's not quite as tanky as a Kurfürst, but it feels like it's more the damage dealer of the brawlers, right? While the Kurfürst is more the tank. And I mean, we will see if there's some adjustments needed, if it's like too much with the secondaries. But so far, I'm really enjoying the Schlieffen.
I've not gotten that far yet, but yeah, I think another secondary battleship line was always going to be, unless it was horrible to play otherwise, apart from the secondaries, I think that was always going to be a fairly popular thing to do. And they have made them fairly fun to play overall, if that's your thing.
Agreed, and they've been very popular. In fact, I'm a little concerned that everything's technically subject to nerfs, but I am a little concerned that some of the ships will, see some nerfs. Just is my personal opinion. I don't have any information, obviously, from Wargaming, but because they are, people are finding some significant success, and are they too impactful in some ways? I don't know. I think, Atom, you made a good point about the armor. The Schlieffen, she has 27 millimeter bow and stern, but she also has a significant icebreaker that gives her a lot of immunity to the big calibers when she's bow on. But broadside, they can be Citadel, not easily, but they're not, they don't have the turtle back. So, and I know for some players that's probably come to a little bit of a shock that, they can't survive the same way that the Kurfürst can. So that will be, it's very interesting how that's panning out. But I think generally speaking, they've been exceptionally well received. In fact, it's funny you mentioned about Jedi, about having a second line that was sort of a second tech tree line that was secondary focus. I think a lot of people were kind of hoping that the alternative branch of the U.S. Navy battleships is going to go that way, right? Because they saw the Georgia and the Massachusetts, and they were like, maybe this is the direction, right? Maybe maybe that we get the brawl, and they went with the Tillman style that were sort of very slow with a lot of guns, and so I think quite a few people were taken a little bit aback. We're hoping more for the Massachusetts Georgia experience or an Ohio experience.
Yeah, I definitely remember that at the time, that there seemed to be a fair few people were hoping that would be something that would make up for how slow they are, and instead they're one of the, I don't know if the least popular battleship line, but one of the least popular ones. You don't see them all that often, and I think anyone playing through the where is it they split off from the
It's the Kansas is the tier 8.
Like if you're playing through the Kansas and the Minnesota, it really is only to get to the tier 10. Neither of them are especially good at their respective tiers. So the 10, at least tier 10, has got a pretty hefty broadside. But it's kind of like sometimes lines are niche lines, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I don't know, some of the Soviet destroyers or the French destroyers or British light cruisers or whatever. But yeah, it's not so much as I would say they're a niche line as they're just not very fun to play, and so nobody really plays them.
Well, they're very special. Like you said, they're very specialized, right? And players who understand the play style, that they're very much about careful positioning, because they can't get themselves out of trouble, right? If they extend too far up a flank or whatever, and players have to be able to aim very well. They have to understand aiming practices, right? And dealing with ships that are at significant distances that may be undergoing maneuvers. And there are battleship mains that are very good at playing that way and are able to exploit the benefits of these ships, like you said, especially with the tier 10 with the Vermont. But yeah, I think for a lot of players, that play style is very, very undynamic. Sort of very can seem very passive, and may not be very appealing for some players, especially on the aiming front. If they are comfortable shooting at stuff that's within 14, 15 kilometers, then okay. But these ships, you have to be able to reliably hit things well beyond that. And some players are still learning that skill.
Also, with like the slow speed, you always have a problem if you lack the map awareness, because if you position like wrongly, you have no way to get out of there. Not just to retreat, but also like if you see it so often that people go towards the flank that's basically already won, and then they are sitting there, and then they have to go all the way back. And if you're like in a slow ship, you just 10 minutes like sailing without doing anything.
It's certainly very, very a very, very unforgiving line of making mistakes, or even just getting unlucky and picking to go on a flank where all your teammates either sort of collapse or run away, And so it's like the thing with, you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than everyone else. Well, everyone else is faster than you, and so you get fed to the enemy team. Whereas, of course, the new German battlecruisers have no such problem because they're all really, really speedy in comparison.
Right, agreed. Yeah, and it's funny because I remember when I played up through the U.S. Navy battleship line before the split happened, and I got to the Colorado, and I actually quite liked the Colorado. But it's to Atom's point, in some ways the most important skill, and I've always felt this way, the most important skill in the game is situational awareness. But I found that if I was able to moderate my positioning well and be, and almost be ready to retreat at any point, whether that's being in a kiting posture on a flank, and then, as soon as I got to some position, I found the gun systems very good, and her biggest issue was her speed, but otherwise I quite liked the Colorado. But it's not. You're right. It's not something I would prefer to play every day. Right. It's a very specialized play experience. So
I liked the Colorado more before they took away its speed retention. That was a nice feature for duking around and dodging things.
But yeah, like the Colorado also suffers, like most Tier 7 battleships, from the overmatch, because like most Tier 7 battleships overmatch each other's noses. So it's always an interesting environment to be in.
Right. Great.
Which is also, I don't know if you have looked much at the armor schemes of the new Germans. Like the Tier 9's nose is just, it's a death trap. Like for you.
For the Prinz Ruprecht? Or?
Yes. The Prinz Ruprecht's nose is just, you're basically a cruiser. You're like, as soon as people figure that out, this ship is just not going to be popular anymore. You're going to be eaten by everything.
Right. Well, she does have an icebreaker, but it doesn't extend very high up the bow.
It's only a 30mm icebreaker. Most ships will overmatch your icebreaker. That's the sad part.
Yeah, you won't be able to bow tank the 431s from the Republics and stuff like that. But yeah, I agree. But for the 406s and 420s and the 410s, you can bow tank that to some extent. But it's not a very big icebreaker. By contrast, the Schlieffen has a very large icebreaker, and I think it's 50 millimeters.
50 or 60 or something, yeah.
Yeah, it's significant, right? So you have to get right over the top of that in order to get in through the bow. So
basically, the Schlieffen is only really vulnerable to plunging fire from the front because the icebreaker extends so high. The stern is a different matter, so if you're trying to kite away with the Schlieffen, you better bring some lube. But the Ruprecht is like in a really poor place because the 27 nose is not just it extends very far into the back. So if you are angling to use all of your guns, there's this huge area that basically everybody is guaranteed to like, well, most battleships. There are some 380s around which we are safe from, but once people figure this out, you won't have a good time. I have a feeling. The interesting part is the Zieten, or that was what the Tate was called, I think. Aside from being hideous, it actually has a 60mm icebreaker. Also a small one, but it's better protected than the Tier 9.
Well, yeah, I don't know if that was a deliberate trade-off, that the Ruprecht was going to be like, from an offensive perspective, was more capable than the Zieten, but maybe it's like the Zieten is more the kiter, right? It's the Nuremberg of the battleship line, right? So
I hate the third layout. In a brawling battleship, you're like, hey, this battleship is supposed to push in and use its secondaries, so let's have the firepower in the back.
Well, although the third turret, the Charlie turret, actually has very good firing angles. In fact, all of them do. I think that's part of the reason that starting it was at Tier 5 with the Deflinger, that the rear turret is 360, and it does give very good firing angles to be able to fire forward. But you're right. That means that the Seton wind angle can really only get 4 rifles on its targets. So. On the other hand, I did like playing through the Seton, so I didn't find her too onerous.
I mean, she performed well when I played, or reasonably enough, but it's just, I call it a paperback ship because it really just needs a paperback on top of this tower. If it's the most hideous ship that I've ever seen.
I mean, from the front, from the profile, it's just it's not a looker.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty clear that I suspect, this is again my personal speculation, that Wargaming wanted to make sure, like German battleships, they have a lot of superstructure that can be farmed, right? This has always been true, right? And they had to, and if they were going to have sort of this squat hull, and how do you retain the same amount of superstructure space to be able to get to farm damage from? And so I don't know. Again, this is just personal speculation. I don't know if they just had to come up with something that just was just not very visually attractive. But
I mean, in this case,
they could have chosen some nicer superstructure for it instead of that weird hypothetical Deutschland style triangle.
Especially since it doesn't really fit into the line is visually somewhat consistent or otherwise, and then there's just this.
It doesn't look like a battleship superstructure at all. It's just
it's. But hey, maybe they'll make a good skin for it at some time.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, exactly. Make a Halloween skin that makes it disappear, or something, or make it invisible.
Just put I don't know, a giant mouth on it or something. Then anything else about the new battleships, or should we move on to some submarine tweaks?
Oh, we kind of talked about Italian destroyers last week, but what do you think of them? I'm going to cop out and say Mr. Blue Eagle.
Okay, all right, no worries. Just don't call me Iolair. Well, to be fair, a lot of people see it as a leading L instead of an I. But we were
talking about niche ships, so
yeah. I guess I tend to hold judgment on things until I actually have a chance to experience. So my professional background is as a mathematician and scientist. And so I tend to hold judgment on stuff like that until I have some personal or empirical evidence. On paper, yes, they look very specialized. They look like they could be DD murderers. All right. They're sort of like, are they going to be like the Paulo Emilios? But sort of toned down a little bit, obviously being tech tree. I just don't know. But it is, I guess one thing I should say is I tend to enjoy new content, and I know a lot of new content like subs and things like that or CV changes or whatever tend to introduce stress for some players. And I can understand why. But I don't have any particular anxiety about the new ships, about the Italian destroyers. I quite like to see what they're going to be like. I think that obviously they're going to get through a variety of changes before they're released, but it should be. I think on paper they look pretty interesting, and they could be very dynamic, right? And that to me, maybe more than anything else, is where I enjoy new aspects of the game, is so long as they're dynamic. They either invoke like new skill development, or they require players to understand things, develop capabilities to play them effectively, and that they're not sort of really static experiences, then I think they could be very successful. So I look forward to them.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it depends on what happens in testing with them, because right now they I don't feel like they look like a complete package. They look like a weird mishmash, and I'm not sure. Like they look like you have like one YOLO in and hope that you do something before you die. That seems to me like a bit dying concept right now. That might change, and we will see how it turns out in the end. But right now, I'm a little bit suspect. But we'll see. They need to be tested first anyway.
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, go ahead, Kaito. I cut you off.
No. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So I don't know if it's a corollary. One similar situation is with the new German destroyers that were released, earlier this year. I have hugely enjoyed those ships. I consider myself a cruiser main. Well, more than 50% of my games are in cruisers. I really like that play style. And I tend to prefer the long-range artillery play styles of the Germans and French and Russians and things like that. And to me, these, had that very similar characteristic. But I find that they're not effective as true destroyers. I think people have already understood this for quite a while, or at least they have this rude awakening when they start playing them. They're long-range artillery cruisers, and they should be played as such. But it means that, like, if you load into a game solo, I still, at least for me personally, if I'm in solo and I'm like one of two destroyers on my team, my first responsibility is to play as best I can like a true, concealment destroyer. Spot, contest caps, fight other destroyers. That's kind of my stay alive, right? Those are kind of the top four things that you have to do. So I tend to prefer, when I'm playing those ships, to be in division with another player who is in a concealment destroyer, and then I can act as backup, right? I can get relatively close to the cap, stay undetected, but be able to put my gunfire on anything that lights up, that my better concealed destroyer ally lights up. And these Italian destroyers, are they going to be similar? That they are better played as sort of support destroyers, as opposed to sort of the being out front and doing the capping and spotting? I don't know. So I'm just curious to see what ends up happening.
It's definitely a topic we've talked about previously, in terms of, should they be kind of subcategories for things in terms of matchmaking? So, you've got your stealthy destroyers and your non-stealthy destroyers, and so each team has an equal number of each, rather than it being like that situation where you say where you're forced into a role that the ship really isn't suited for, just because you are the only destroyer or one of only two destroyers on the team. And it can be kind of frustrating if you're in like a French destroyer that's built not at all for stealth, and it's a domination map, and you can either try and go in the cap knowing that you're going to be outspotted by several kilometers, or else you play how the ship's meant to be played, but all your teammates shout at you because, noob DD, not capping, not spotting, right, even though you are in no way built for such a thing.
Right, which is, again, the consequence if you choose to play alone and you take that ship, right, as opposed to being in a division where you can coordinate with an ally who maybe is in a concealment destroyer, and then you become the cruiser who provides you're a close support cruiser, right, which is cool. But you're right, exactly. It's a curious draft, and actually the French destroyers in my mind tend to be better concealed. I tend to run them with a full concealment build. And you're right, most other concealment destroyers are still going to outspot them. But unlike when I play the Russian gunboat destroyers, then I don't care about concealment. I'm a long-range artillery cruiser. The Khabarovsk has a 6 kilometer detection. I'm like, so what? Who cares, right? But then again, like you said, I mean, if you're not capping and you're not spotting that, well, spotting isn't so much an issue because you have a 14-kilometer passive radar. You just firing your guns and see who fires back at you, and you just get to light up the entire flank. But the capping becomes a serious issue. So, Which is always why when you're in a Soviet gunboat destroyer or a French, the best battle types are standard battles.
Yeah,
Because you're like, I don't have to take anything, right? I can just run around and shoot stuff. That's all I want to do anyway. So, should we talk about submarines?
Sure. So there are two things, right? There's one, the dev block, and then there is the changes that came with the patch. So basically they added some things. What was that? They added an underwater torpedo reticle. I haven't actually played submarines since the patch. I have to. You can now enter training battles playing as submarines. That's a change that I really like because, so far you could never actually test things, right? When they made changes and you'd wanted to see, okay, how does the new homing torpedo work? How does that work, right? And that's what they should actually be interested in, people testing things, was denied to people that couldn't test things. This is something that was much needed.
Right. Great. I don't know how well people have gotten accustomed to the two different torpedo types and, under which scenarios, which type of torpedo is superior or not superior to the other. I think there's a lot of open questions around that. And I played some submarine gameplay, not a whole lot. I think there are people that are more adept at figuring that stuff out than I am. But I'm curious to see where. Well, let me take a little bit of a step back. So, like I said, I generally like new content coming to the game. I want sort of the richness to evolve over time of the game. So generally, changes by themselves don't bother me. In fact, most of the time I welcome them. I find that the gameplay interaction with submarines is very uncomfortable for a lot of players, and I think they have a valid reason, right? With destroyers, they too can be very concealed, and if played well, can have significant influence on flanks, and that's part of what they were designed to do from day one. Submarines take that to a different level, and the interaction is quite a bit different. And I know a lot of folks feel that the interaction is less predictable and less reliable, and that and I think that that's a valid reason to be uncomfortable playing in games with subs, because if there's a sub that is on a flank but you don't know where it is and it's harder to find, et cetera, and how effective are destroyers really in combating them, so that I think there's some big question marks there, just in general with subs. It's clear in my mind that Wargaming intends to keep subs in the game. That's their prerogative. I'm okay with that. And they're clearly trying to find some, I don't want to use the term balance because I think that gets overused, but they're trying to find some way to put them into the game in a way that the interaction is playable, yet they still have some element of the characteristics that Wargaming wants with them. But obviously they're experimenting right now, right? And again, having worked in software development for 3 decades, I get it that they don't have enough people testing on the public test server, and they need to put this into the live server to get a real sense of what's working and what's not. And I think that's okay. But we'll just have to we'll have to see how this pans out. But I think there's going to be a lot of changes to come. I think the pacing is good. I like how Wargaming's been quite open about how they've been doing this, and they've been sort of pacing things in terms of how they introduce changes. But I'm still not convinced at this point that they've found a niche for them that works well in mainstream game modes, especially like random battles. I don't know that it's been realized yet.
Yeah, that's kind of what me sort of. Honest, it kind of pisses me off. The thing is that they have sort of actually already released submarines, because they have kept submarines in the game since the first started testing. They haven't. What I was thinking at first when I said I want to test in random battles is like they bring them in for like 2 weeks or so. They let people test it. Then they give them out. They get a data because you need to analyze your data, right? First you need to collect data. Then you need time to analyze data. And while you analyze the data, you don't need to collect new data because, you can't just constantly throw in new data anyway. So you test it maybe for 2 weeks or whatever, and then you go over what you've collected. Then you maybe collect some feedback, and then you do some changes, and then you try and test again. But they have kept submarines in the game, even when they already announced changes to them, even when they knew that what they were currently testing was an obsolete product, they kept them in game. And they kept them in game since they introduced them, and they keep them in game. And it's clear that they have no clue what they do with submarines. They don't know how the spotting should work. They don't know how the interaction with submarines should work. They don't know how counterplay should work. They don't know what submarines should be doing. This is basically at best a beta stage, maybe an alpha stage what submarines are in. And they are fully implemented in the game. They are part of all random battles, technically, if somebody plays them. They are easier to get now than when they will be released, because you don't have to grind them. Well, I mean, you have to do the missions, but you don't have to grind through line. You don't have to spend credits to buy them and so on. You don't need a dedicated captain because they are like premiums. It's like they are basically easier now to play than once they are released. They are part of fully into the game, and they are in a stage where they are absolutely not ready for that. And I understand that they need more data, but that's just like, it's like taking a self-driving car that just crashes every other day into some other car and be like, look, we the development in the lab isn't going fast enough, so we decided to just put self-driving cars on the road, and, you just gotta have some accidents. Sucks to be you.
I mean, you joke about that, but I kind of feel like Elon Musk would be perfectly happy doing that.
Yeah, but, he'd probably be stopped by some laws, hopefully.
Well, yeah, there's a little bit of apples and oranges there because, when you're dealing with, electric cars, you're obviously talking about real property and real, human safety and so on. But yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from, Atom. And there are elements of that I agree with. I also understand, that, the biggest issue is getting enough data in my mind. I know that when I used to work on developing software, that we would release content, new features, and we would have a pretty good idea about how the content would get used. But we always found that even with the best of testing and regression, automated tests, and all the other things that we did, our user base would always find things that we didn't discover, or we misinterpreted. And so, but I definitely get where you're coming from as far as once you have a body of data, why do they have to remain active in the game mode, right? Why can we not get this data within, a 2 or 3 week period, during these, and then we turn them off until we figure out what, changes we want to make and then do it again. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if they're under some sort of internal pressures to get these released by a particular date and they need to be going full steam with the testing and just keeping them in all the time. I just don't know. So it's an interesting question. My biggest issue, my biggest concern is really about the playability with them in the game, because they're so different from other game, how we interact with other ships, that it's just the comfort level isn't there yet for them to be a regular part of the game. So
they also seem to be, I don't know how you would get around this, but they also seem to be by far the most binary class, like maybe as much as old RTS style carriers, in terms of people have either been playing them enough to really know what they're doing and be good and effective and maybe a little bit scary with them, or else they die within the first couple of minutes of battle. And I always get worried when I see submarine divisions, but sometimes you'll have 2 people in a division, they're both in their subs, and they both go and die in the first couple of minutes of battle. It doesn't seem to make any difference. So yeah, it's interesting to me that they specifically moved away from the RTS model to get away from that. That was one of the major driving factors, and yet they've now introduced this class where it's shaping up to be one of the major, elements of submarines is that kind of binary nature of them in terms of player skill. So, I mean, arguably they have less effect on a game than all the RTS carriers did by far, but that's not to say they have no effect on the game.
Right. I mean, just their presence alone, right? Sorry, go ahead, Atom.
Yeah, but commenting on the binary nature, also, it's often that since they are single launch torpedoes, they will either miss everything or they will be devastating to your ship. It's very seldom that they do like chip damage. But even if you're fighting a Shimakaze who has like massive amounts of torpedoes that do a lot of damage, if you are like angled correctly, oftentimes you just take one, which still hurts quite a bit. But it's like, but for subs with the single launch nature, it's very often a all or nothing kind of thing. Which also means that either the submarine is just gonna like death strike someone or really hurt them, or it's just not gonna do anything.
Agreed, and I think that goes back to Jedi's point that there's going to be a very stark difference between can you play them or not effectively, right? Like you said with RTS carriers, we saw a very similar sort of player skill dynamic, and so I agree with you on that. I mean, when I play subs, I tend to think I'm more like a destroyer. My first jobs are to stay alive, to spot for the team, and to cap. And I personally only submerge when I have to. Like I'm under threat from being spotted, whether it's by planes or some other source. Otherwise I try to stay on the surface. Because I have maximum speed and maneuverability, and I can spot for the team and sort of do a lot of area control. I think a lot of people see subs as chaos makers, right? Or they sort of create this very unpredictable dynamic in the game, and just their presence. So Jedi, back to your point around the subs, whether you're skilled or not, just the fact that there's a sub in the game, and if you suspect or know that the sub is in your vicinity, it suddenly changed the dynamics of the game for you, right? If you're a surface ship, and even if the player is very inexperienced, it does, at least for a while, it doesn't matter, because you have this thing lingering in the back of your mind. Am I the next target for that sub? And maybe that's the intended experience. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. But I know that when I'm playing them, I tend to play them more like a concealment destroyer in a lot of ways. And, because that's a mechanic I'm comfortable with, or a process I'm comfortable with. But maybe they're supposed to be more like the Asachios, where they're just kind of go wide and dump torps and play very selfishly. I don't know.
Yeah, they are just quite a selfish class overall. Possibly one of the most, like, some destroyers can be that way, but even if you're playing very selfishly, unless you're sailing around next to the cruisers and battleships, which occasionally you'll see a destroyer, like the torpedo destroyer doing, it feels like you're giving far less generally to your team in a sub, unless you are playing like you are and playing it like a destroyer almost, and being on the surface the vast majority of the time.
Right, and I personally I've kind of liked that dynamic in some ways, because it means I have smokescreen available to me, or a virtual smokescreen, which is going underwater pretty much at any moment. I'm not restricted other than my charge time, and if I remain on the surface most of the time, I never exhaust my charge. Right. Back to your point, Jay, I routinely see players who launch into game in subs and their first action is submerge, because I'm a submarine. I'm like, no, it's like you're slower and you're going to use up your charge and not have it available to you when you actually need it to get away from a threat or whatever. Right. So, but again, part of this for me, having played the game for a long time, is I like to play to win the game, not because I'm like, I'm not playing for the rent money, as one of my colleagues, Jimmy Jazz, says. Right, we're not here to pay the monthly bills, but I still have a benign interest in winning the game. So I'm going to play and I'm going to apply practices that try to help win the game. And if that means I'm in a sub, I have my advantages are my concealment, and so that means, spotting and capping and things like that. So, and that's the best way I can support my team. But like you said, there are probably a lot of players that don't view it that way.
I feel like the problem is if you're trying to play like a submarine, like a concealment destroyer, is often that if you are forced to like submerge, then you are sort of not, I mean, it depends on how much you need to submerge in a way, but when you have to go like really deep to disappear, then you aren't really doing anything anymore, right? You are completely blind, you are cut off from everything, and you can't like torpedo anything and so on. If you're like a destroyer and you smoke up, I mean, in a way you're a bit more vulnerable, but you can still like use your torpedoes out of that smoke, and you can very quickly leave that smoke and you can spot again, and you are somewhat nimble there to run away and such. In a submarine, it feels like once you're forced to defensively go down, oftentimes you aren't doing like then you slowly like turn around and try to sneak away and then resurface somewhere, hope that it's far enough away. And meanwhile, you can't really help much. So it feels like once you need to get out there and need to submerge, it just become rather useless for a prolonged period of time.
Right. You're effectively out of the game, right? You've temporarily taken yourself out, as if the player isn't even in the game. So I agree. Which is part of the reason I when I do play them, I try not to put myself in positions where that has to happen, right? Because then I'm very low value to the team. So.
Yeah, that's what I haven't played like with the recent patches set, but I've played submarines in various stages during all this testing. And what I've always found is when I try to like go into the cap, it's very like the problem is if the cap gets threatened or if then the enemy destroyer pushes it close and so on, and I need to like get out or so, for a long time I just do nothing. And if it gets really overrun, then oftentimes you have a really hard time because you're blind and you just try to sneak in somewhere in a direction and then hope that nothing's there when you surface again. So, but if you do like the egoistic part and just like sort of go to a flank and do that, you can be more effective because you aren't under the threat of being, sort of have to take yourself out of the game. So it's a bit weird because I always wanted to like more go for objectives and back up, my destroyer or something, but it can so quickly, I think, go wrong and force you to dive. But, I haven't played him that much, I guess.
Well, but that's part of the skill development, right? And that's, to me, the positive aspect of this, right? Whether it's subs or anything else, when there's new content, there's new opportunities to learn how to play those well and have a positive influence for your team. And that part is appealing to me. But the issue to me right now is the interaction is so atypical or so unusual compared to what the game has been about since 2015, so, and earlier.
Oh, I mean, the original conception of the game, we can kind of, say explicitly did not have subs in it at all. They are very definitely a later edition.
Sure.
What was it we were talking about in the previous one? Parasitic game design is what we were talking about. So yeah, they kind of fit into that category almost. Of a later edition that's there primarily to provide content rather than actually something that fits in well with the game overall.
Right, enriches.
And now they're trying to make it fit in with the game somehow. Hence this very protracted period of changes and testing we're going through.
Right.
Yeah, they just don't really fit that much into the core system. Also, like, I guess we can expand that talk to like the public test changes to anti-submarine armament and submarines. Like, because the normal thing like detect them, shoot them like you do with ships doesn't quite work. So obviously there's the anti-submarine warfare. And they are heavily changing in a way how that works. Basically, they make anti-submarine warfare less powerful. You'll also only have one charge. And submarines will be able to, well, they'll get more hit points, basically. So while they talk about things like that in order to guarantee dealing damage to submarines when given the correct lead, while at the same time keeping the effectiveness of the armament at the same level, we increase the area of damage and maximum of damage charges and blah, 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 blah. But when you read to the changes overall, you just realize that those words are not actually what they are doing. They are just nerfing anti-submarine warfare because they want submarines to survive.
Well, and again, this may be a reflection back to some of Jedi's point that there's this big skill gap probably between 80 to 90% of the players who they haven't been able to figure out subs, and the 10% that like have already mastered it, right, and are very effective. And wargaming is trying to figure out how do we make the comfort level on playing subs better. At least in words, it's suggested that they're trying not to increase the level of influence, but I'm not sure where this is going to end up going. Again, I kind of want to hold judgment until I can see empirically what's actually happening. We'll just see. But on the surface, I agree with you. It feels like they're giving too much advantage to the subs. They're putting more onus on the surface ships to be able to make their anti-sub warfare drops, make them on target. So that if you do get them on target, then they're very effective. But that stipulation is there. You have to know how to aim and predict where the sub is going to be. And that's not, is that really going to pan out here? I don't know. I can definitely see on the surface level, that's no pun intended, that this is feels like the subs are going to get the lion's share of the advantage, or the players who play subs are going to get the lion's share of the advantages. But again, all of this comes down to they're trying to figure out where how they fit in a way that's like, passable at least. And so they're gonna continue to experiment, I expect. So
I do think we're going to be in for probably a long period yet of lots and lots of changes to submarines generally overall, like the concept of submarines as opposed to individual balance changes for individual subs, which is it's almost feels to me more like I don't know if this is a correct comparison really, but the way they change things in War Thunder. Things are like ships tend to be relatively stable in World of Warships, and you do get changes to individual ships, but at the moment with the way they are doing things, I mean, in War Thunder they are, if anything else, Gaijin is more spreadsheet driven even than wargaming is, and so you end up with some very odd balancing decisions based on, well, we want to get these things to a certain win rate, kind of. And not really taking into account then the individual stats and how fun a vehicle is to play. And so, it feels like we're in that mode with submarines where they're going, we want this number of people playing, we want this win rate, and the actual balance of subs and the play experience of subs is sort of secondary to that almost. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
No, it does. I mean, and to be fair, and I'll just be blunt, it's a business, right? And so there are business targets associated with this. They've made a huge monetary investment to develop subs, right, or any content, and they probably have. And in fact, if you're running business effectively, you're going to have business objectives, money basically. That targets that you're going to want to associate with those investments, and that comes with the territory. And so, I think that there could end up being, I agree with you that there's going to be a lot of adjustments from a class level. to be able to hit those targets, but also hopefully not intrude on the game so much that they start losing player base in other areas, that they drive away. It is so negatively impactful in other areas that it ends up being a net negative for the business. So yeah, I'm not sure they figured that out yet. Well, I think that's a great analogy, Jed. I agree.
I think we're going to be on the submarine seesaw for quite a while yet.
Yeah, probably. I mean, in other changes other than anti-submarine warfare, they've drastically increased the hit points, so they're basically now destroyer level hit points. And they have really increased the duration of the pings, right? So the US ships will now have a 90-second ping duration with a double ping. And the German 75 seconds.
Yeah. But it's the double ping, it's not the singles, yeah.
Yeah, it's the doubles. So it requires some skill, obviously, to get the double ping. But once you have that double ping, it's like it's not gonna run out. It's like you either damage combat or it's not. If I dodge the additional pings, now that I know a submarine is pinging, I can probably, maybe ping will run out before the torps arrive. That's not happening anymore.
Agreed.
It is a pretty big buff overall for subs, these changes, with the effectively making it harder to hit them with the most effective anti-sub weapon, which is the airdropped depth charges, and then getting a survivability increase in hit points to boot at the same time, and getting the increase in the double ping length, so they're more likely to be able to do damage. So it's going to be a big gift for those people that are already have figured out how to be effective in subs.
I think the double ping comes from there was the recent change where basically you can ping one ship and then torpedo that and ping another ship, and the torps will continue to the ping they're locked on, right? And then you can send additional torps to the new ping. And I presume that they made the ping duration this long so that you can actually do that without then you can't refresh the ping on the first ship, right? So the way they changed how the pings works, if you want to ping two ships and torp both of them, you can't refresh the ping on the first ship. So now they're just going to make the ping last long enough that you can double ping, launch 3 torps or so, and then go on the new target for your other torps.
Yep, perhaps. But yeah, bottom line is that they're obviously, it seems to me that they're trying to make subs more appealing, more comfortable to play. But the net effect is going to end up being, are they going to be too influential? And they're just going to increase the level of discomfort surface ship players have trying to play against submarines. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But yeah, I expect there's going to be a fair amount of turbulence before we settle down to something that's going to be, playable or at least passable.
Turbulence is definitely a good word for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I tried not to be too judgmental on this stuff. I know people feel very strongly about things, which is good. I try to be somewhat more measured in my views. But yeah, that's just me.
I mean, it's always good if and take a step back and with less. I mean, you're being more rational if you are less emotionally invested, generally speaking.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be honest. I've had some very negative experiences playing against subs. And a couple of times I've been on my own stream, I've had opposing players know I'm streaming, and I'm effectively being stream sniped, right? And I'm playing, and I end up basically just spend the whole time running away from the sub. And that's no fun. Fortunately, it hasn't been very often, but I can see, that tells me if this is going to be typical of the experience, not the stream sniping, but if you're the target of a sub and you have no countermeasure against it, that just takes a lot of the enjoyment out of the game. So.
Yeah, speaking of countermeasure, radar will no longer see them now at periscope depth. That's also been removed.
Yeah, again, I see all of these changes as going. They could go either way. They could say we made a mistake. We shouldn't have increased the HP pool, or we're gonna, expand the influence of airdropped anti-sub warfare. All of this again is subject to change. All right, and I don't know if they're sort of swinging the pendulum one way or the other, and they're trying to like narrow down where they want that pendulum to fall. I don't know. So.
It feels like they are still pretty much in the big swing, like in the early test phase where you try something and then you radically change it towards the other side, because they are not close enough that they can fine tune it. They are just really in an early stage of submarines. It feels like to me, right? They are just heavily trying everything they can think of and see what sticks.
Yeah. Well, and again, we talked about this at the beginning. I mean, to Wargaming's credit, and this is something I'm offering, is they're at least being communicative about what they're doing. Even if you disagree with what's going on, at least they are communicating what it is, right? That what their plans are. And, the rationale, and you may disagree with the rationale, that's okay. But I'd rather at a minimum, I'd rather have the communication. It is their game to change as they wish. And I recognize this. But, then we also have the choice to not play the game if we don't like, where it's going either. So.
Yeah, I think we can conclude submarines here, or does anyone have anything to add to the topic?
Not really. Just wait
Not
till we have carrier submarines to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, especially given the significance of the changes that they're planning for 0.11.0. Right now, what we're seeing with subs, it's like I don't care about anymore, because this is all going away in a month.
Yeah. So then something else that has happened recently is, so the new patch brought some new bugs, and one of them has already been fixed. Sorta. So I mean, that's good news, right? So they reacted very quickly. You might all be aware there was the bug with survivability expert that just gave way too many hit points to different parts of the ship, so they would no longer be depleted as they should have been. And they actually, credit to Wargaming, they reacted rather quickly. And I think in Europe today was the hotfix.
And it went to North America as well, I think, this morning. So
I actually did here at the dates. Yeah, the hotfix should be applied now. But what they have said is that they actually changed how a survivability expert works, in a sense. So a survivability expert does now add additional hit points to certain parts of the ship, but in moderation, or how should we say this? It now adds, like what they said, destroy with about 2,500 hit points in the bow section and roughly 20,000 hit points in total. The increase in the bow section would be about 400 hit points. So it now adds a little bit to each section, but not, not the whole amount.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I just want to say, so in essence, it's gonna be not as good as it used to be, but it should be an improvement again. So we'll be the expert. Should help now instead of harming you.
Yeah, I agree. They to a large extent they've addressed the unintended nerf, but I think mathematically it will still. I'm still concerned that there's going to be some sort of effective nerf influence here, and here's why: because the survivability expert, the way it used to be, applied all of it to all the HP increase to the hull, and now, or to the main part of the hull, and now they've said for consistency, to be consistent with other sort of HP influencing characteristics of the game, like an arms race and things like that. They've now proportioned the addition throughout all the major parts of the ship. Okay, that I think on a logic perspective makes sense, but the consequence, I think, is that it, for example, the bow example they said where they increased the hit point pool of the bow, let's say on a 20,000 hit points destroyer by 400 hit points, means that bow takes more damage and subtracts more damage than it used to before it reaches saturation. And so it just from a pure math perspective, it kind of feels like this is going to be not fully restore it. It is, like you said, it's going to largely fix the bug, 80% or whatever in terms of the level of influence it had. But it's not going to be as restorative as if they just went back to what they had originally. Now, I'm sure Wargaming will look at this and they'll analyze the data and find out, if subs see an appreciable decline in their survival rate with this skill than what they had previously, maybe they increase the amount of HP per tier that the skill provides, rather than it being, was it right now 400, I think it is for destroyers, or 350 for destroyers. Maybe they make it 400. So I don't know. We'll have to see where this ends up going. But I agree with you that they were very responsive and they made the right call on that. So
yeah, it's interesting that they had a bug and they fixed the bug, but they were like, wait a moment, instead of just fixing the bug, why don't we change how the skill works in the process? I mean, maybe it was something that when they were already working on that code and they had already plans to do in the future, that they snuck it in right now. But it's also a bit weird because I don't think I've seen anything about that on like the news pages, and I have seen that here on Reddit. But like when you actually change a skill, you'd be expecting the information to be spread a bit more than just in a obscure Reddit post where they say, oh, if we fixed the bug, but by the way, we changed the skill in the process.
Yeah, and which makes me wonder whether they actually made a change for 0, 10, 11, where they intended to proportionally distribute the effects of survivability expert, and they just coded it wrong. Again, this is just personal speculation. I don't know. And this was actually what they're implementing now, releasing now, is actually closer to what they had originally intended. But then, like you said, why wouldn't they have disclosed this even in the release, and either in the development blog, or meaning as part of 0, 10, 11, we're going to change how survivability expert works. I don't know. Again, all this is just purely speculative, but yeah, it is curious how that ended up getting resolved. So
I mean, what I could see is that they had plans of changing that skill in the future, and they started working on the code, but it wasn't finished yet, and it got accidentally implemented, and it wasn't done yet. And then now that they fixed it, because code is obviously complex, and sometimes you change one thing and unintended consequences happen. But like a bug like this to happen, it feels like they might have worked on this part of the code somewhat, and they never announced anything about it because it was planned as a future change, and they just pulled it for now because of an accident. I mean, I guess we'll never know, but...
Right, so somebody merged domain and didn't mean to, it wasn't supposed to, or whatever, who knows, right? Exactly. So...
Then there is an update on the indestructible modules, which is... I mean, it's a bug. Bugs need fixing, but honestly, it's one of those bugs that I'm not actually mad about. But yeah, obviously bugs need fixing. And
right. Well, yeah. If you're in a ship that benefits from this, then great, you have a buff for an update. and then after that, who cares, right? So
they are afraid that the fix will destroy the game, so they delay it, basically. Which is probably a good idea.
Well, again, were there other changes that they made in the update, and this was a bug that they didn't review, didn't discover, and they don't want to mess with it further because it's too, it's too risky. So that I definitely would respect their decision on, in this case. But yeah, I think this affects the ship torpedo systems as well. Am I mistaken? No, those are probably part of main armaments, so maybe those aren't impacted. So I know the AA mounts and some of the others are, and secondaries, I think, are the ones for sure are. And so if you're in a secondary build battleship or an AA spec ship, you're very happy for this update. So
I have to say, I haven't lost my torpedoes yet on the new German since the patch, which is surprising because if you know like a Tirpitz or like a Pommern, by the time you get in torpedo range, you usually don't have torpedoes. So
exactly.
Maybe they are affected too. Who knows?
Almost reminds me of, this is a complete aside, but I don't know if either of you played Payday 2, but there was, going back a couple of years, there was one a patch where they put out there was a melee weapon that there was some kind of there was like a negative value where it basically, if you put in this melee weapon, you could get the maximum stealth bonus even if you were carrying like a rocket launcher, and so it made for a very, very silly day of doing the different heists with very, very silly builds. I was kind of sad when they fixed it almost immediately. But, yeah.
Which game was this?
Payday 2. It's like a co-op
Payday 2
shooty game where you do crime heist stuff.
I see.
It's kind of Left 4 Dead, but with cops instead of zombies, essentially.
I see. Okay.
So on the topic of bugs, I haven't seen any mention of it here yet, but have you guys noticed, or have you also had the problem that sometimes you hear random sonar pings when you shouldn't?
Yes.
It's like, even if your ship's already been sunk, I have no idea what triggers this, but it's like weird because sometimes you move around and you hear this ping and you panic and then you realize, wait, that there is no submarine.
Right, or the subs is detected on the other side of the map. Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if this was intended to be an audio cue. Again, this is for the countermeasure question for surface ships to be able to know that there's a submarine operating in your area. Even if you haven't detected it, and the way it got coded, it's present on the entire map at all times. I don't know. It's a good question, but yes, I've heard. I certainly have experienced this. I think I've only observed it when subs have actually been in game, but I have noticed that like I hear it like even when the sub isn't anywhere close to my ship. So,
and even if you're sunk, you still hear it.
Oh. Communication to the dead, apparently, or something.
Well, I mean, your ship's on the bottom of the sea, the sub's down there, so.
Exactly, and so the ping is, rebounding off of the hull of your ship that sunk into the ocean. Actually, that's an interesting question. As part of the ambiance, are they actually gonna? I'm just thinking of this now. Are they going to have the ships that are sunk actually continue to remain physically in the game? Because today what happens is as soon as they essentially drop below the surface, they disappear, right? So they don't interfere with the navigation of surface ships. But now with subs, does it mean that the hull actually becomes you see it sinking to the bottom, and then it actually becomes part of the terrain that's at the bottom?
I think once it hits, it like sinks below the bottom, or I haven't paid that much attention, to be honest. But I don't think the wrecks stick around on the bottom of the water, sadly.
I see.
I think they just disappear right now. But there was in a visual Q&A they did, I think a while back, there was a question about it, and they at least said something, I think, about different sinking animations and so on. So I think they're considering doing more with sinking ships now that there's an underwater, but that's probably something for the future that they haven't quite planned yet. So other changes that have been announced are changes to test ships and Soviet carriers, which is a bit of a clickbait title because there aren't really any changes to Soviet carriers, other than there's some camera things. And honestly, I feel like the high-tier Soviet carriers are overperforming, so there should probably be changes. But I would have been very surprised if they actually press things like that.
The one thing I did find interesting from this, and I don't know if we've had this information elsewhere, but they talk about the alternate firing mode on the Canarius, which means the Canarius is going to get one of these burst fire things that for now are only on the super ships. So that's, on a low tier ship, that is going to be kind of interesting. Let's say the main battery reload is being in alternate firing mode has been increased from 40 to 50 seconds. So you use it, but you're going to be then out of commission for almost a minute.
Yeah. It's when they have, even on the super ships, right? I have, at least on the super ships, I have not been particularly impressed with that mechanic. Maybe I'm using it wrong, but I find it very on the Zorky, which is the Russian destroyer. It really hasn't impressed me, right? It's like, oh, I get to fire all these shells for a few seconds, but then I can't fire anything for a long time. I'm like, I mean, other than maybe some specialized situations where like I really need to get those last few shells in to try to secure a kill, I don't know that I would ever want to implement that alternative firing mode for the super ships. So
it feels almost redundant given the main battery reload boost consumable also being in the game. I mean, it's effectively giving the same thing. It's giving a burst of damage.
I mean, it's a bit of more of a burst, and it comes with a downside, while the reload booster is sort of a straight up buff. The problem is...
you say that. I mean, we've had, like, the ones with the reload booster tend to have a slower base rate of fire compared to their contemporaries.
Fair enough. But what I'd say is...
have your gun... Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Adam. Sorry.
What I'd say is that the alternate fire mode is only useful if the salvo finishes, right? And this is always a gamble, because if it doesn't finish the enemy off, then you put yourself in a worse position. So you have to gamble, is this enough to finish it off? Then you can go to the alternate fire mode and you can throw out that burst. But it's pretty much a niche case, and it's a bit of a gamble at times.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, like with the super ships, I just haven't seen enough value with it.
It almost feels like they've just looked at the various autoloaders in World of Tanks and gone, what if we had that in World of Warships, where, you know, you get this burst of damage and then you have a really long reload, which, you know, works in World of Tanks, can be quite effective with things like the French heavy tanks and the American autoloaders, where you just get that really high burst of damage, but the amount of damage you're outputting compared to an enemy tank's hit points is, you know, it's a way higher proportion compared to World of Tanks. Right. So therefore, it's
essentially an assured kill, right? Yeah. In tanks, right?
Well, it's especially in the late game, that they can become especially deadly just because everyone's got fewer hit points. So you can run around and 2 shots there, 2 shots there, 2 shots there in rapid succession, and, you know, you've killed a couple of enemies. So yeah, but it just feels like it has way less of that utility in warships.
On the other hand, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, on the other hand, with the Satsuma and the Hannover, their buffed capabilities, to me, I found as genuinely useful. Right? Who doesn't want a super Kurfürst with 14 kilometer range secondaries, right? Yeah, and yeah, so to me, it's for those, it seemed to be pretty clear. The Yahagi, I'm not so much not the Yahagi. The what's the Japanese destroyer super ship? Having a mental blank on the name, but the Japanese super ship.
I want to say Yamagiri. Is that right?
Yamagiri. Thank you. Yes, Yamagiri. I knew it was begin with Y. She, the alternate torpedo mechanism. Can provide some interesting, alternate torpedoes can provide some interesting choices, but for the Zorky and the Conde and the Annapolis, I haven't seen the value there.
It's very niche case, I think. There are some situations where it would work. Yeah, I'd much more be interested in things like changing torpedoes. That's something that has a lot of potential.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, we've got someone in the chat saying that, other people have considered it to be very, very useful. And yeah, if you can get to that position where you are able to output a burst of damage where you've got almost a guaranteed hit on somebody's citadel, then yes. But, how is that any different from having a reload booster in the Jean Bar or one of the French destroyers, and you've got a broadside British light cruiser, and you're just kicking out the reload boosted shots. Exactly. It's not really, it's just a different flavor of the same thing in my eyes.
Right. Great.
But I guess it's more effective than, like, you're getting a higher burst than you would be, say, with the French heavy cruisers with the reload booster.
Maybe to an extent, but again, with the super ships, then your guns are out of commission for a significant period, right? Whereas with the the French ships that have the reload booster, they go back to their normal reload cycle, right? Which is still going to be better DPM than having your guns, inoperative for 40 seconds, right? I'm like, why would I want this, right? So
I almost feel it would have been better, instead of just having this period of complete downtime, if they'd had, you get 40 odd seconds of a slower reload and then it goes back to your base DPM level, rather than just nothing for 50 seconds or however long.
Yeah, I mean, like in World of Tanks, it's obviously that you have your autoloader, right? You're probably hiding somewhere. You just quickly move out of cover, you shoot your shells, and you go back in cover, and then you have time to reload. But World of Warships is a game where most of the time you are just constantly like exchanging gunfire. You're not quickly peeking out from an island, shooting once, and going back. This is just not really how World of Warships works. So the autoloaders doesn't seem to work that well. It's like really just if for 1 second you see a broadside and you only have that moment to shoot. There are niche cases where it can work, but for the most part it's awkward.
So it might get some changes and refinement. These things are definitely not finalized yet.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, this is again an experiment, right? And that's okay, right? I'm okay with that, right? But you're right. I mean, they're going to look at the data and they're going to say how effective were these ideas, and did they produce satisfactory, results from a damage output or gameplay experience? I don't know. So. Yeah, the interesting thing with 0.11.0 they've announced on the developer bulletin is that they're now going to look at bringing in the super ships into random battles. But they're not going to treat them as tier 10, right? So they're effectively tier 11. Yeah. In my view, and because I mean, unless I suppose fail div, only tier 9s and 10s will see them. And I personally am okay with the new content. Who doesn't want to play a Hindenburg and know that you can farm an extra 25 to 50,000, damage off of Satsuma or a Hannover, right? It's like, cool, right? My average damage gets to go up. So that part doesn't really bother me too much. So,
I mean, I've said this in the past, I think, but I have no problem with tier 11, right? You just... the thing is that the lower tiers aren't getting played these days. You don't find players if you try anyway. So basically the game these days is tier 5 to tier 10. Maybe tier 4 as well. If you play something low, you're probably playing with bots most of the time. So just extend it on the top maybe. And it's also like tier 10 gets too cramped. And if they could push stronger ships to a tier 11, then the balancing might improve. It all depends on how the tier 11 is done, right? If it's if it's balanced, but the base concept I'm fine with.
Right. Well, and then the interesting thing is that it's all surface ships, right? So there's no super carriers. There are no super subs, right? So and people, it's okay. Now I'm sorry, I'm not trying to seed them with ideas, but the I think if they introduced mechanics on so it's clear that they aimed the special capabilities of these tier 11s to be some sort of enhancement to artillery or their regular sort of surface action capabilities, right? If they had done something like, we're going to introduce heat-seeking rockets, right? That we started that these this was legitimately introduced in the U.S. Navy after World War II. They realized that sort of traditional artillery was passe, and so they started taking a lot of these ships, the Cleveland classes and the sub variants like the Fargo classes and things like that, and started mounting torpedoes on them. Okay, sorry, my wife was letting me know something. So so if they hadn't done something really dramatic like that, where they said, your ship can get taken out by a heat-seeking missile at from 20 kilometers away, then yeah, for sure that would not have been received well. So
yeah,
I give it 2 years.
We get the submarines with like the what was it, the Regulus or whatever the first sub cruise missiles were. And stuff like that.
Exactly. I mean, the reality is that most of the surface artillery ships, the cruisers and battleships during World War II, their artillery was used for shore bombardment. That was like 90+% of their function. They were mobile artillery platforms.
Yeah, there were some battleships who like that was their entire career almost in terms of shots fired.
Yeah, surface combat between ships, other than like destroyers were probably a little more the exception, but other than but for the big capital ships, any sort of capital ship engagement was quite rare.
Yeah, I mean, they even like in the early days of Warships, they tried this. How was the game mode called? They tried a game mode where you had like those forts that need to be destroyed. Yeah, it never quite worked out, and then they dropped the idea again.
Right. Well, yeah, and I think they figured that out relatively quickly, that was not going well, especially when the forts actually had pretty strong alpha and decent accuracy. And if you were in a cruiser and were being targeted by one of these, it could take you out, and so you had to put some priority in taking out the installations.
Yeah, I feel like it would take a lot of effort to make something like that work. To get it right, what the range should be, what the balancing should be, how the spotting should work, or things like that. And it would probably require more team play than the usual World of Warships team is willing to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which is why I think it can work okay in like operations, because in operations you do have short batteries. So.
There's a cat rolling around on my desk at the moment. I was
going to ask you, what's the name of your cat?
It's Sam.
Oh.
He's actually just been to the vet today, but I think he's recovered already.
Oh, that's right. You did post on your Twitter account. You did tweet about that.
Did he get vaccinated?
yeah. He's had his COVID booster. No, he's got some kind of possibly a UTI. So they just gave me some antibiotics to give to him. So.
I see. Got it.
He's feeling well enough to roll around on my desk and be disruptive anyway.
Okay, cool.
Pull up my sleeve. You're helping, aren't you, Sam?
Of course, cats are very helpful.
So, Atom, I know that you post your cats or post pictures of your cats quite often. You'll forgive me. What's the name of? Because you have 2 cats, correct?
Yes. There is Whiskey.
What are their names?
Whiskey is one. He's a male cat. He's currently residing in a box behind me. And then there's Sabrina. Sabrina is a female and has 3 colors.
I see.
So, in other news, there are some additional visual improvements coming, which is something we are all probably looking forward to because they look amazing.
They do look good. It seems pretty clear that so tanks, I think, and Jedi, you can speak to this better than I can, but I know tanks, they basically did a rewrite when they introduced 1.0, and they did all these visual improvements, and it seems like Ships is going through a cycle of visual improvements, but they're not re-implementing on a new engine.
Yeah, it's definitely to a less dramatic extent, I would say.
Yeah.
It was a pretty big change in World of Tanks, and they did it in a fairly gradual manner. So I think it was in patch 9.0. They changed a lot of the the maps, but it took a fair while before they had all the actual tank models done into HD as well.
Right.
Which I kind of wish we were going through a similar process. And they've talked about, was it in the Discord Q&A or somebody asking about how come some of the older models still look kind of crummy compared to the newer ones? And I wish they were going through a deliberate refresh process instead of it being like seemingly a very low priority thing that may or may not happen at some point.
I think it just comes down to where do you invest your money from a development perspective, right? So as you pointed out, relatively few people play certainly below tier 4, and even tier 4 it's not super common. There's Sam. Hello, Sam. So they, you have to make a choice, where are you going to invest your money for that type of thing. But I mean, I think we can all, the one department that seems to get pretty universal praise is the art department for for Warships, right? And I think rightfully so. I mean, sometimes they've had some kind of duds, like the Seaton, in terms of some of the modeling, but 99% of the content they come out with the skins and the camos and the visuals on the ship designs, they've really done an exceptionally good job. So
I would partially disagree. Like some of the skins and perma camos have been like they're of quite a mixed quality. Like some of them come out looking really nice, and they're just you can tell they've had a lot of thought put into them, and others are just they kind of look like the intern designed them, sort of thing.
True.
Yeah. Are you a big fan of the beer can?
I don't
camo
hate them.
For the
the Roma, and I've got the Yamato one as well. I think they gave us them at some point, but yeah, I kind of like them. Oh, and is it the Key that also has one of those designed by that guy?
Yeah.
The Key has a very pretty one, and the Yamato has the one with the huge rangefinder.
The crossbars.
I find that's amazing. I'm not such a fan of the Roma beer can. That's not quite my thing.
Yeah.
How well received was that? Sorry, I'm just reading chat, but it was well received at the time, definitely. It looks pretty like old world of tanks. Still, I mean, there's videos on my channel of how it used to look, and it's really. Well, these days, you would look back at it and think, "Oh, that must be a mobile game or something with that level of graphics."
Yeah. Well, what ship would the Hugo received the lacquer
that was a nice one.
Lacquered camo. That is really attractive.
And there's an upcoming one for the Chungmu based on the what were they called, the turtle ships, the Korean sort of 15th, 16th century ships that like that. I really like that. I actually kind of like the paper lantern look ones as well, to be honest. I know they're not everyone's cup of tea, but
yeah, I thought those were quite attractive as well. Which it makes it kind of a shame to take it in a battle and have it get all sort of like discolored from the battles, battle activity, but
yeah.
I don't know, that's a certain charm.
It is a proper. It's funny though, because we started off the game being sort of relatively semi-serious in terms of everything looking kind of like actual ships, and then these days we've got all the wacky Halloween camos and the water world looking rusty camos, and you've got spaceship camos, and you've got Godzilla and King Kong and anime camos, and it's quite eclectic. Maybe not quite so much as some other games out there. I was watching a video the other day on, it was some Korean MMO anyway, which just has the most bizarre collection of cosmetic. Like, it's fantasy set, but you can have your mount be like a taxi or a police car, or you can have like fake panda hands, or I think there was a tie-in with the thingamy suits from Squid Game was one of the latest costumes in the game, so just completely all over the place. So maybe Warships isn't quite that bad, but it's definitely a long way from any kind of historically consistent anything at this point.
Well,
not that I really, it's not really a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing.
Agreed. Yeah. I think they're clearly aiming this at different demographics, right? The Transformers is an example. There's a very large, demographic in the United States that, grew up with that during the 80s and then to the 90s. And so they're clearly trying to appeal to that. And all of them are like that. So, or most of them are.
Very privileged here. I'm going to stroke his belly. I don't get to do that very often. Not without getting my hands blended.
It can still happen any second.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Does Sam have a reputation for being quite aggressive?
No, he's a lovely cat. He's just like most cats in that he mostly doesn't like having his belly touched. Some cats do, but most cats are kind of iffy about it at best. And Sam will occasionally let me stroke his belly. And this being one of those times, I guess. You're just showing off because you're on camera, aren't you, Sam?
That's true.
Of course.
How about your cats with Whiskey? And it was Sabrina, did you say, was the other one, correct?
Whiskey loves getting his belly scratched, and Sabrina is partially a trap. Depending on her mood, she either just lets you or she starts to play. Starts to play means obviously your hand's the toy.
Right, exactly. You have to wear a glove. Okay, got it.
Also, one of my cats growing up that was 100% of the time, if she showed you her belly, it was do not touch ever, ever. You would regret it.
Now, Sam named for the fabled cat.
Partly, yes, Unsinkable Sam, but also partly after Sam Vimes from the Discworld series. I don't know if you've ever read those. So
I know of it, but yeah.
What are you doing, you mad beast?
We've sort of hijacked Atom's agenda here.
This is the community Cats Tributor podcast. So,
I see.
Done, Sam. Thank
you.
We
we knew we would eventually talk about cats, so we've covered ourselves with the name.
I see. Got it. Yeah. But yeah, I'm looking forward. Coming back to the Warships topic, I'm definitely looking forward to the updated maps. I've always been a big fan of Warrior's Path, so I'm really curious because they have sort of the very Füssen style, Neuschwanstein castle that's on the sort of the southwestern quadrant of that map, and so I'm really curious to see what they end up doing with that. So
yeah, I don't think it's on any of the screenshots they have shown so far.
No, but it's clear which map it is. So they've given it sort of a fall foliage style with that.
The maps that are getting changed are Trap, Tears of the Desert, Warrior's Path, and Solomon Islands. I'm also wondering if they're going to, besides the visuals, I suspect they might just rework them a little bit, maybe change some islands a little bit and stuff like that.
In terms of their, not just making aesthetic changes, but actually
gameplay changes, like making an island a bit higher, lower, or a bit wider, or so on. I mean, they used to do that a lot, that they kept rebalancing or changing maps in previous... Well, I mean, I haven't done much with maps in the previous years, but now that they are reworking them, I think, didn't they change, for example, the channel a little bit in Two Brothers? There weren't any real major changes, I think, with the updated maps, but there were some islands got slightly different.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did make a few changes in there. I mean, one map there's two maps that I really miss from my earlier wargaming day or Warships days. The first was the previous iteration of Islands of Ice, where the domination was vertical rather than horizontal like we have now. That I used to like that map. And the other map that I miss is Shards. Shards used to be a mid-tier map. That was predominantly for tier. I don't know if you remember, but Shards was more for tiers 5 through 7. I think 8s could show up on it as well occasionally, but the old version of Shards I really miss a great deal, because I had a lot of very positive memories in games on that old map. So I was kind of bummed when they changed it up and turned it into a high tier map. So
It's been a long time. I don't think I quite remember how the old charts looked like.
Well, you still had sort of that diagonal arrangement. They first of all, they obviously made the map bigger, right? Because they've got the higher tier ships on it. But it had the center didn't have those big island formations on the north and south sides. You had an island that was in the middle, a little one, but there were islands on the sort of the east and west side that sort of contained the middle. But I had some very fond memories not long after I picked up the Scharnhorst to playing on that old map. So.
Yeah, I'm also like I'm playing mostly tier 7 to tier 10 these days, and then when I take out a lower tier ship or tier 5 and I'm on the low tier maps again, it gives us a certain nostalgia. Also, it can be like really fun again seeing more low tier maps.
Yeah. Well, in fact, one of the maps of Scanning Overhaul is Solomon Islands, right? And I have lots of memories of playing, my early days on Solomon Islands. In fact, that map, if I remember correctly, has gone through a couple of iterations even before this one is being introduced. In fact, if I remember correctly, they one of the last time it went through, it had sort of that valley that was formed on the southwest on the South Island that you can't sail through, but you could fire across north south, which you used to not be able to do.
Yeah, I think like here there is a picture I think here of this. Is this?
Yeah, exactly.
With the river right through it.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly the one. Yeah, because if I remember correctly, it was all fairly uniform height, and you had this very long space where you basically couldn't see each other. And so this actually provides a mechanism that, at least for the larger capital ships, they'll be visible to each other, through that valley. So.
What I'd also like.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'd also like to see them like rework some of the. I don't know. Do you guys enjoy Mountain Range? I don't know. I feel like Mountain Range it has gone through a few changes in its lifetime, but I haven't touched it in a long time, and I don't know. I just don't like it. Are there any maps that you really hate?
Mountain Range doesn't appeal to me as much. Especially if you're in a, I find that it gets more campy than usual on the east and west side, because they have these sort of very dense island clusters, right? And that doesn't really appeal to me. So that aspect is less interesting. Plus, with that very large sort of central island formation down the sort of the western third of the map, that isolates Alpha from Bravo and Charlie, that has a huge influence on players' ability to sort of control the map, because it's a lot easier to control Bravo from Charlie than it is from Alpha. And so maybe that makes it tactically more interesting. But for the 80% of players who aren't, into the really hardcore tactics and things like that, to me it becomes kind of a big psychological barrier.
It's definitely ways. One of those. It's like if I'm playing that one, I always get a sinking feeling if I see everyone, or 2/3 of the team beelining for the A cap. You just know you're going to lose at that point.
Right, exactly, because they're cutting themselves off. There are very few firing opportunities from there to the eastern side, right? So. And again, maybe that's intentional. Maybe that's part of, like, if you're thinking tactically, that's meaningful. In fact, Neighbors has a lot of those qualities as well. People tend to gravitate towards Charlie because there's all this island cover, but it becomes if you don't know how to play it well, it basically becomes a trap. It conceals you. It constrains you to those areas. Which is why I tend to prefer to go and take Alpha and then control from Bravo. And if everybody stays in Charlie and you can just pick them off from there, that's fine. That tends to work, pretty well. But Neighbors, Mountain Range is one. Tears of the Desert is better than it used to be. You know, there was a reason it was
Yep.
called Tears of the Cruisers, when it had a lot more open space in the mid. That one's better. That one, though, I used to not be a very big fan of, the old Tears of the Desert when it was first introduced. But other than that, yeah, maybe not. I mean, like I said, there are some maps I would prefer to see what they had originally, only because just from a kind of a nostalgia perspective, because it's what I was used to. I kind of felt like what they did with Shards is that they repurposed a map. They said we need to have more high tier maps, and rather than engineering a brand new one, they repurposed one that they already had. So that's what it kind of felt like.
I'm actually
Cap Monitor stepped away. Cap Monitor, take care.
Yeah, you have to go and do a
Mhm.
beer thing. Super
Yes,
important.
that's his lifeblood.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed there is. I'll see if I can get the link for this, but Flammy's actually only about an hour ago tweeted out the internal armor scheme for the Atlantico, which is
Okay.
something we were talking about last week and speculating on what the armor would be like. And yeah, got a very interesting internal armor. It almost looks like the rebuilt Italian kind of battleship armor scheme, where it's going to be really hard to citadel. So yeah.
I mean, you
Yeah,
know, a lot
I
of
haven't
it
seen
could
it, so,
still change, right? I don't think they've even started testing it yet.
Yeah, obviously I can't.
It's interesting though, because it just reminded me of what we were talking about earlier with people wanting the US, the Tillman or the super standards or whatever you want to call it, that side branch to be slow and tanky and have really good secondaries, and that kind of looks like what the Atlantico is going to be. Slow and tanky and really good secondaries.
Right. But it's also, I mean, if they introduce a ship line like that or ships like that, they're also going to have some very you have to be some very good situational awareness to know when it makes sense to push in. I mean, we see this today with the original German battleships. Like everybody's like, I'm in the Bismarck, I'm in the the Friedrich, or the Kurfürst, and I still see players just like marching in. I'm the big bad German battleship with the super turtleback and the super secondaries, and they just get they get melted in the first 5 minutes. And you have to know when it makes sense to push in. When you have the advantage, and that's a skill that requires development. And this could be similar, right? And people are going to see these videos. You see players have these, the very skilled players have these videos of radar minotaurs and all these sort of specialized game mechanics and experiences. But it comes with a lot of skill development in order to pull that off. And I don't know if ships like that could end up require that as well, like the Atlantico. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it will depend on how, like, those secondaries look interesting. Let's say how they perform will determine a lot, I guess, about this ship.
Yeah.
I think the first time we talked, we had Drac on. We joked about there because he reckoned it. What was it going to be? Was it Vickers Armstrong, or it was a British shipyard that the Atlantico looks to be based on a design from anyway. That we were joking, we might get like a Vickers tech tree. So maybe that's what they have in mind for the South American line, maybe.
Yeah,
who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like a lot of the new content has been oriented towards sort of or at least is characterized in the way they've been described as being sort of mid-range ships, right? That I kind of feel like there's less content that supports sort of the long range gunnery sort of experiences. And a lot of the ships, including the new Dutch cruisers and things are really sort of intended for more of the mid-range action. Is this on purpose to like get players to play closer together, get our opponents to play closer together, and not rely on the the 20+ kilometer firing ranges that we've classically seen with especially the battleships. I don't know. They're just, again, personal speculation, but we'll have to see.
Well, I mean, better that than going down the trend of having everything be like the Soviet, the original concept for the Soviet battleships, where it was going to be super accurate at long range.
Right. And then we're going to have the radar that can only detect, battleships and carriers at, what was it, like 15 kilometers or something like that. So in the original concept, designs. So.
I mean, people have been complaining for years that, about too much long-range sniping and the game too passive and battleships that just camp in the back. And Wargaming has just kept like developing long-range sniping ships, and then they had Deadeye, and they were like, this is perfectly fine, this is what the game needs. And then with Deadeye, maybe it was an actual wake-up call there. I hope that they'd be like, hey, maybe the community has a point there. That's not really how this should be going. Who knows?
Right. I don't know. Yeah. But again, we've also seen that a lot of things have changed since August, or at least I perceive that there's been quite a few changes in terms of communication and so on. And so, I don't know that they've been perfect, and they probably can't be, but I think they've made a good faith effort to try to improve the rapport building with the community. Especially around the communication, even if you, like I said, even if you don't agree with all the decisions. But yeah, and maybe part of that was the Deadeye question. So.
Yeah, so basically we've covered all the topics we've planned so far. So I don't know, do you have any topics you still want to talk about, or are there any questions in chat?
Deadeye was legendary misstep. Yeah, and that's going to happen, right? Even if it's the best, even if it's a game developer that has an impeccable reputation, everybody, makes mistakes. That's okay. So long as you just recognize them. And again, we're not playing this game for the rent money. So, if mistakes happen, it gets changed and we move on. So.
What annoyed me about that, I was not necessarily that it happened in the first place, but how long it took them to respond to it. Because they could have responded, they could have fixed this in a month, and they took 3-4 months or so to fix that obvious issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's the relationship you have with the player community that to me is more important. So I agree with you.
Like, I mean, as you said, everybody makes mistakes, but it's about, like, for example, now with the bug, they actually addressed it. They had a bug, they hot fixed it within a week. That's okay, right? If you make a mistake, you just fix it. But if you have a mistake, then you just keep it around for months because reasons. That's what I have real issues with.
Yeah, agreed.
So I guess otherwise we'll just call it a night here.
Okay. Well, what do you usually do after your stream? So, or after this interview segment, do you go off into Division and do the game, or?
No, I usually feed my cats, or they feed on me. And then, I mean, it's a Friday, but it's 10:30 p.m. here already. So.
Okay, agreed. Well, I don't want to keep you too late. I want to thank both of you for having me on. It was a genuine pleasure, and really flattered that you had me here. So, for folks in the audience, again, my name is Iolair Ghorm. You can just call me Iolair. That's usually what most people call me. I mean, Eagle in Scots Gaelic, a nod to my Scottish heritage. And if you'd like to see me, I'm usually on during the weekends. I'm located on the west coast of North America, so UTC -8. For those of you from a time zone conversion perspective, usually on starting around 12 noon my time, which is going to be 2,000 hours UTC for usually 4 or 5 hours on both Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes they slide in some stream days during the week, especially now that we're heading into the holiday period. I should have some more flexibility. I'll probably be streaming additional time. Love you to come by, say hello. We do obviously have Twitch drops and giveaways and things like that. And so thank you, both of you, gentlemen, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we were glad to have you.
Yep.
Well, I wish you both a terrific rest of your weekend and happy holidays. Are either of you going anywhere for the holidays?
Just to my parents, pretty much. So,
your parents in the area, or are they?
Yeah. Oh, my father and stepmother live here. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna visit my parents too, but I'll actually have to cross the border because they live in Switzerland and I live in Austria. It doesn't make it a very long trip, but these days borders can be problematic, although they seem open right now.
Yeah. So are you more on the western side of Austria, like Vorarlberg, or
I'm not quite in Vorarlberg. I'm in Innsbruck in Tyrol.
I see.
But yeah, I'm in the bottom, like, sausage part, or how you want to call it.
Yeah, I know. Well, I know where Innsbruck is. So, okay, very cool. All right, good. All right, well, take care, gentlemen. Thank you again. Wish your audience a terrific weekend as well, and we'll catch you later.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and bye.
Bye.